And joining me now is Tarık Ozlu, who is the chair of the Political Science and International Relations Department at Antalya Bilim University, and Dimitrios Tirantafilou, who is an associate professor of international relations over at Kadir Has University. And joining us from Dallas in Texas is Pete Sessions, who is a former Republican member of the U.S. Congress. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Good to have you on Straight Talk. Now, this bill ties together several strands of U.S. policy in the Eastern Mediterranean, and we're going to touch upon all of them. But let's start how this affects Turkey. Mr. Sessions, I'd like to begin with you because besides many of your political titles, you also served as a member of the Congressional Caucus on Turkey and Turkish Americans. The reality is that despite Turkey being sort of a key member of the NATO alliance, dating back to 1952, in recent years, it has crept closer to Russia. You have the two sides signing huge contracts in the energy sector, as well as deepening defense cooperation. When you look at this bill, is there a growing concern, awareness in the U.S. government that these crises, namely Syria, the S-400 missile defense system, as well as the jailing of Pastor Andrew Brunson, whether or not these are becoming sort of permanent features and that the perception is that Turkey is gradually tailing away from the United States?
Without any question, you would recognize that my role as chairman of the caucus, the Turkish caucus, started with several hundred members several years ago. Over the past several years, as both of our governments, both of our business relationships, both of our international policy angles have come into conflict with each other, it has dwindled the support that we have in the United States Congress for wanting to be a part of a better solution. I worked very diligently and still believe that a solution by working together, by both sides understanding how important the relationship is. I said this directly to Wes Mitchell, the State Department official in charge of the Turkish affairs. I said, Wes, how important is Turkey? And the bottom line is that our relationship spans back not just from 1952 forward, but is more along the lines of what is in the best interest of the United States and Turkey. We are in a difficult time, and we need to admit that. And all this legislation is an interest from those that might not be as closely associated with Turkey as we wish they were. They're two very serious senators. Mike Pompeo is serious. But this is a real threat, as I see it. General Jim Jones, who's head of the Business Coalition and the East-West conference that deals directly with Turkey, is very concerned. And we are trying to build back deeply within your government, starting with your ambassador to the United States, who is a very, very complimentary man who sees firsthand what this is. And he would say to each of us that we have to continue working, but it comes from both sides and we've got a lot of problems. So your professors have outlined this, and the bottom line is we could make mistakes if we don't resolve this right now.
Okay, Tarık Ozlu, Pete Sessions says that this is a real threat. When I've read some of the policy papers, some analysts have sort of categorized this proposed legislation as sort of symbolic, sort of a warning, a headshot over Ankara's bow, sort of to come back in from the cold when it comes to its closeness with Moscow. Would you agree with this?
Actually, I would agree with this particular understanding of the developments on the ground, but I would like to add something very important. I think Turkey would have felt much more happy if it were included in this US-led initiative. If Turkey were made a part of this three-level cooperation between US, Greek Cyprus, and Cyprus as part of drilling this natural gas resources in the Eastern Mediterranean region, Turkey would have felt much happier with that. But unfortunately, Turkey seems to have been excluded from this ongoing cooperation because of some particular fundamental problems between Ankara and Washington. In recent years, we have seen that Turkey and US are not on the same pages regarding the crisis in Syria, regarding the future of Iranian nuclear proliferation non-proliferation business regarding Turkish cooperation with Russia in the context of Syria, in the context of S-400 missiles. So on many different issues, these two allies, which have been allies since 1952, are on different pages. And the latest manifestation of this crisis has recently taken place in the Eastern Mediterranean region. And I think both countries take it very seriously to find a long-lasting solution to this problem because it is not sustainable. So Turkey is in a very difficult position in the context of balancing its relations with the US on the one hand and Russia on the other hand. And we also have to develop our own relations with the countries in the Middle East. But on the other hand, we have been very much somehow, quote unquote, dependent on the United States in the field of security and defense for many years. So we are really in a very dire situation. It's a very important crisis point in Turkish-American relationship that requires extensive dialogue and discussions.
Okay, Dimitrios, is Greece happy that Turkey is excluded in this? And do you think that sort of policymakers are sort of wondering whether Greece or Turkey is now becoming sort of the linchpin in the U.S.'s policy in the Eastern Mediterranean?
Well, I mean, we have to consider two things. First of all, just like the Turkey-U.S. relationship goes back to 52, at least within the context of NATO, so does the Greece-U.S. relationship too, because both countries joined the same year. And likewise, Israel is another long-standing ally of the United States. So we're talking about a region where the U.S. has allies, long-standing allies with different sorts of relations. Now, and we also have to put on the table that this is just a bill. It's a draft bill. It hasn't been passed. It's not law of the, it has not been passed by Congress, and it will not apply for the time being, right? And we have to look at it very carefully because I think we are at the stage of discourse and rhetoric. And we have to go look at beyond it. There's discourse and rhetoric on the Turkish part, in Greece as well. There is a segment of Greek public opinion, policymakers, analysts saying, oh, this is great for Greek interests, and somehow we have to exclude the Turks. But on the other hand, there's another segment. I think the Greek Prime Minister was here recently when he gave his press conference with President Erdogan at the palace in Ankara, has said that, you know, our objective is to find some sort of cooperative security arrangement for energy and everything else in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Okay, Dimitrios, you bring up a good point. Mr. Sessions, so how do you overcome this card discourse then?
It starts with the United States, and the United States needs to be big enough to recognize that our partnership in the region is through allies, people that do not always have to agree, but the people who can work together for the common good, not only of the success of the region, but perhaps more importantly, but the people directly of those countries that are a part of that. The threat from Russia has never been more stated than in the last few years about what they have done in Europe. They are attempting to simply take advantage of circumstances that happen across the world, no matter whether it might be Africa or anywhere else. And so I think both your valuable professors have hit on this, but I would say it's up to the United States. The United States needs to carefully understand that we working together beats pitting people in the region.
You mentioned the Russian threat. So another article of this proposed bill sort of foresees impeding the delivery of the F-35 aircraft to Turkey as long as Turkey continues with its plans to acquire the S-400 missile defense system from Russia. And this is hypothetical. If Turkey were to find some sort of middle ground with the U.S. with regards to the S-400, what's the likelihood of this bill being pulled? Is there any chance with that?
Well, I don't know that there's a chance of the bill being pulled because it really has not been submitted yet. It's a draft bill. What I would say to you is that there are competing factors on both sides, and we need cooler heads to prevail, who actually the United States needs to find a way to find that linchpin. I will tell you, you're up front. The information that was given accurately displayed the crisis points and the differences between our two countries. Mm-hmm. There has to be resolution. We cannot allow our relationship with a power like Turkey and the long-term relationship to become less important than a new friend or someone else that we prefer. We cannot do that. We should not. And so I think this bill is simply a political statement, one which we'll find out how many people get on it if they drop the bill. but it's a reality that we've got to work together.
Okay, Tarek.
And the United States appreciate that.
All right. Sorry for cutting you off there, Pete. But Tarek, I want to ask you, how is Turkey supposed to approach this trilateral axis between the U.S., Greece, and Israel now?
It's very actually easy to understand Turkey's potential reactions to that. Ankara will not feel extremely happy with it because it is not happy. I want to challenge my colleague for some time. Let me put this way. The bill is, I think, quite straightforward in the sense of singling out Russia as the main existential challenge in the context of U.S. regional foreign policy. Turkey is the only country which seems to be excluded from this particular draft bill. Turkey's name is only mentioned in the context of some negative externalities. Turkey is being somehow put under a kind of culprit category in this particular geographical location. Let me also add some other points. In the context of Middle Eastern politics, I have seen that Turkey and the US are on the opposite sides. For example, we were on the opposite side in the context of Israeli decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital city, American support to that, the American idea of establishing a kind of Middle Eastern NATO. We are again at the opposite side with the Americans on this particular issue. We don't recognize Russia as an existential enemy. But the United States has very much made it very clear that, and Russia's name has been included in the U.S. National Security Strategy paper, National Defense paper. So we are not in a position to say that it's going to be extremely easy for these two countries to find a kind of midway solution, despite our membership.
So you're underlining the fact that Turkey's exclusion is one of the most important things. All right. Another important angle to this bill is energy. It's actually in its name. Now, on the surface, it's proposed that the aims to boost the development of large natural gas discoveries off the coasts of these countries. Mr. Sessions, I want to turn to you. The U.S. is flush with its own oil and natural gas bonanza per se. So what's the real reason behind this proposed bill? Does it need these extra discoveries?
What it's essentially about is to make sure that we don't find that those countries that are involved are held hostage by Russia. As you know, a part of the Russian foreign policy is with their energy policy. And we need to include Turkey in every single bit of this, whether it's a new pipeline that comes across Turkey and moves across, or whether it is new exploration. And it goes back to what we recognize that since 1974, this other larger issue, and that is the Greek problem, the Cyprus problem with Turkey. So it does not mean that we should not transcend that. And that's what my advice would be to our State Department. Transcend this and find a way for new partnerships, find a way to get past the old and get to the new. And then I think Turkey would recognize how serious the S-400 issue is, how serious the F-35 is. The F-35 is the most leading edge fighter in the world, and we will not give that to someone that potentially could do something with that would be against America or freedom's best interest.
Okay, all right. Dimitris, I want to turn to you. Mr. Sessions said that one of the points that he made was that the discovery of these energy resources would be beneficial for Europe, which heavily relies on the imports of Russian natural gas. But when you look at sort of previous discoveries of natural gas and oil, it's generally made for the benefit of the countries nearby. It's for domestic consumption. When you look at Greece, when you look at Israel, when you look at Egypt, these are all net energy importers. So does that argument really have a strong stance then?
Well, I think it does. I think it does. I mean, I agree with Pete Sessions. The issue is, given the geography, the underwater geography, the deep seabed context of the Eastern Mediterranean, these finds impinge on each other's exclusive economic zones and continental shelves, and therefore you have a number of countries involved. And from the moment a country has a potential to have some mineral wealth, it's not going to let it go. And so whether that's Turkey or Egypt or Cyprus or Israel or whoever, in this case, it's actually the three other players here, four. I mean, it's not Greece so much, it's Egypt also that comes into the equation. So that's why I'm saying one needs to come up with some sort of cooperative mechanism. And I think that's just where we are. And I think the messages from the US is not just this bill. Tariq mentioned the national security strategy of 2017. Even there, Turkey is not getting mentioned as a strategic partner as it used to in the past.
Yeah.
So the signals have been there for a while that the paradigm needs to shift. And I think the paradigm needs to shift everywhere.
And this proposed bill could certainly lead to that paradigm shift that you were talking about. All right, Dimitrios Tarkozlu and Pete Sessions joining us from Dallas. Thank you very much for joining us here on Straight Talk.